What's up, everybody? Wes, Dead Air Night here with always
Typical Lydia.
Today's show, we're going to be doing the 1992 classic Innocent Blood.
I'm glad you put the wildcat sound in there because it is the most, it's almost up there with the sound of piranhas from Piranha.
In case anyone forgot.
Yeah, how could you forget? Yeah, it took me aback. This is the second time I've seen this film. At the very least, I might have seen it a third time, but I'm not sure because it has been around for quite some time. But I forgot how unvampire-like the vampires were, and how well, she's a cat-like woman, so it kind of works, but it still surprises me.
So do you think that this is more like a spiritual successor to Cat People?
Or Sleepwalkers, maybe.
It could very well be. It does take you out of it a little bit. I think of when sound engineers use animal sounds, my advice to anybody is to either lower pitch, heighten pitch, combine it with other animal noises, reverse it, do whatever you have to do so you don't just sound like a literal jaguar.
There is a few bands like those like industrial metal bands where the singer kind of sounds like this. And I think that's what makes me laugh twice, nay thrice, in that I think she'd make an excellent metal singer.
She would. There's a few things that are very strange about this movie, and we'll definitely get into it. This is a Wes pick, and definitely a film that, and we've been saying this a lot lately on the show, didn't think that we would ever really get to. And I think that, to me, it was a film that was really locked into my past, in so far as for many years, I couldn't even really remember the name of it. I definitely remembered the VHS box art of Marie's face, pale face, and the guy dead over the tablecloth. And I was thrilled when years later I remembered what the name of the film was, and I said, oh my God, this was that film that I watched when I was definitely way too young to watch this.
Always a great feeling when I remembered what the entity was, that it was that VI caught a glimpse of when I was maybe 4 or 5, and it stuck with me terribly. Like, yes, and there's a special place in my heart for that movie forever. Innocent Blood, I would have watched as a teenager. Maybe my mom would have rented it. I was probably in my 20s, maybe late teens, 20s. And I do remember it being unique in that I liked those sort of sexy vampire films at the time. And this was pre-Twilight, so there wasn't like, I at least I think and hope it was pre-Twilight. There wasn't a lot of spins on the vampire genre, or it was beginning to spin, and I really enjoyed that. There was a few other vampire films around the time my mom had been renting because she was on a bit of a vampire kick when this came out, so it tracked, and it was entertaining for my father, who would prefer those crime films, action films, and it is billed, as you pointed out previously, as a comedy action, which we'll talk about how little sense that makes. Maybe it makes a little more sense in hindsight now that we're adults, but not much. And I really do enjoy the look of this film, and it's filmed really well, and it's got some nods to Gothic architecture and other vampire film things, and vampire lore and fan service is there for vampire fans. But it really fell off my radar until you mentioned it.
Just to take you back to the comedy, I would like to read you the literal box art of this DVD, the comedy that takes a bite out of crime. And if you would like to hear what Kevin Thomas of the LA Times said, delicious, exhilarating, comic energy.
What the fuck, man? There's maybe some slapstick almost level of comedy way later in the film. Way later. Because we were talking about sort of the crux, like the point of this film that we as we remember it. And if you look at the Wikipedia, it's like basically the second paragraph starts where we think the movie begins, but there's a whole hour of movie before that. So yes, comedy, comedy action. There's not even a lot of action, really, honestly.
This really is like a noir crime film. And I want to have the listeners really think about vampire films of this era. For many years, what vampire films were to most people were Gothic storytelling. We were talking about foreign lands, castles, rolling hills, bodices, things of that nature. And then in the late 1950s into the 60s and 70s and around that time period, those things were passe, and they just tried to reboot it by still keeping the scenes that we would understand as castles and Gothic and everything taking place in like the 1800s with what Hammer was doing. And you just upped the violence and you upped the sex. And still people were not interested. You needed, or they were interested, but at once they became accustomed to that. I mean, for God's sakes, Hammer tried to make it into the modern world, which is key with Dracula in 1972. But the real trick, the really interesting, fun trick that started in the late 1970s, you had films like Martin that Romero had put out. And then into the 1980s, you had things like Fright Night, and you had things like The Lost Boys. You know, people wanted to see vampires as the ultimate outsiders, and you can't make them foreign aristocrats anymore. You needed to make them punks. You needed to make it Rear Window. You needed to make it something other than, like I said, foreign aristocrats, something other than Gothic. You can take those Gothic elements, but let's put a modern spin on it. Innocent Blood, very much in the realm of this. John Landis did it once before with werewolves. Let's try it again with vampires. Now we're doing a mob movie. We're putting it into urban Philadelphia. Originally, the film's idea was supposed to be New York, which maybe seems almost too on the nose for like a gritty crime movie. But Philly, that's great. And we're going to do vampires like this with a twist.
I think there was like a real push at this time to modernize them, yet pull them in from the outside too, from this 1992 onward a little bit. You get the television show Forever Night. So if you were a fan of Forever Night, you would be a huge fan of this, and vice versa. I know my mother enjoyed Forever Night, as campy as it was. You also get that Beauty and the Beast show,
Oh my
that sort
God.
of thing.
Yeah. Holy hell.
Yeah.
Jesus, I forgot.
Trying to modernize, citify, civilize, and, maybe it was some sort of early attempts at injecting like an anti-racism note to a lot of these shows, like V was, with the aliens, that sort of stuff. Like Star Trek became around that time as well, with really positive spins on amalgamating different types of people and having that mosaic, that cultural mosaic, which we here in Canada definitely have that sort of like, are very used to that idea of a cultural mosaic, meaning that everyone can bring their own sorts of lifestyles and creeds and beliefs and practices and still live comfortably together. And it's that struggle that's interesting, right? When there's a struggle. Like in V, huge struggle. And in Star Trek, when it comes up, usually they're focusing on the egalitarian point of view there. Forever Night, I mean, how are you going to be a cop at night? It's like Dexter. It's, to really modernize the whole idea and take the supernatural entirely out of it. It's how do you blend in with these needs in this very different lifestyle, especially somebody living at night. So, I mean, maybe Forever Night would have been chasing Maria around. That would have been hilarious to me in a way. Because I forgot the cop's name in Forever Night. He's just Forever Night, like Knight Rider's name's Knight Rider now.
Or it's a bit what Anne Rice was doing, where it's trying to show the age of these vampires and say, okay, we had our vampires in the olden times in the Gothic era. Now they had to move along with the times, and how did they do that? And we're going to demonstrate the eternal quality of these entities' lives and how that would make you feel like an outsider because you're perpetually frozen and there's this secret society that exists within the modern world, that type of thing. From the little I know of Anne Rice, because again, I'm not an intellectual, but this just very much seems like that. But when it comes to the rules of vampirism, which are already flippant enough, yeah, because I mean, one movie they can't cross water, other movies they're picking up toothpicks, sometimes sunlight, sometimes crosses, sometimes whatever. But this movie, and it took this third viewing to really sink in how fucking weird the vampire lore is here. But what I wanted to, the real reason why I wanted to do this was really the nostalgia factor, because I always associate this film with that special time in a kid's life where you still don't really know what the fuck is going on. And that's what I remember as a child watching this film, not understanding what the fuck was going on and why the vampires were like, my kid brain. You're 10 years old, you're cognitive, you're aware of things. Okay, they're vampires. I don't know if my dad maybe explained to me that they were vampires, but the first thing that sticks out in my mind was how messy they ate. And that seemed weird to me. Why are they mushing all this blood all over their face? I wasn't used to vampires that looked like a real horror show when they were done feeding. And all I remembered was just images of the plot, but not the actual plot itself. And so it was almost like someone showing me a fucking dream from my childhood when I first rewatched this film. And I don't know if there's any movies like that for you or any of our listeners, but that's where I was at watching this.
Entity was definitely like that for me. And certain points, like I just rewatched Tales from the Crypt so that I could see that Santa. Remember when you had figured out for me finally who that menacing Santa looking through a window with a screaming woman was? And that's all I remembered of the show. And I don't think it was the TV show.
No, it was the movie.
It was the film. Yeah. So I started rewatching it the other night because it's the first segment. We'll have to do that in the show sometime because that's just beautiful. Yeah. It was a very fun watch, a very, very fun watch. And it was, yes, like watching, I felt like it was watching a movie of me watching it when I was a kid. It's a weird feeling. This film with its monsters and its vampires that aren't very vampire-y, because if you're, I think the only real thing they have is a problem with sunlight and that they drink blood, period. That's really where it begins and ends. And Vampires are fun that way for creators because you can take those rules and toss them out, make up new ones, do whatever you want, make them sparkle if you really feel the need, or take that sparkling and crush it up in your hand as much as you can and stomp it on the ground under your stompy leather boots because it's a modern vampire story. Like I wrote Nightface with that in mind, in wanting to completely modernize them. In the second part, we get a little more medical about it, which I still haven't finished writing the second part of that, but
We're all waiting.
it's that idea. Yeah, no, thank you, and my
There
apologies.
was
Me and George R. R. Martin just sitting around.
I just imagining you on a very old computer now. I'm trying to remember the blurb on your book jacket. Was it a return to violent vampires or something like that?
Yes, that's a great memory because yes, it was. That was the initial publishers blurb on it was a return to violent vampires,
Yes.
and when they had when they were at book events and stuff like that, they had a banner that said, "These vampires don't sparkle" or something like that.
I remembered that too because it was almost because by the time you published Nightface, that would have been like Twilight was still in its heyday in and around. Even though you started writing, to be fair, gang, she started writing that book way before Twilight. It just by the time it was published, it just coincided with like you were like the anti Twilight release.
Exactly. If I would have been a little quicker on the uptake, if it would have come out when it was initially written, then that would have been a whole different thing. But it might have been lumped in with things like Forever Night or Lost Boys or Innocent Blood, like those sorts of things that would have been percolating in my mind when I wrote it and wanting sort of like not a pushback with Anne Rice, but something that wasn't as florid or as high concept, just something a little more accessible.
Now, although there's some challenging concepts in Nightface, I suggest you all, if you can get yourself a copy, read that book. But fuck all that, Liz. Not fuck your book. I like that book. But fuck all what we were talking about before. What is this movie even about? Anyways, probably vampires, but
Probably vampires, but at the end of the day, what is a girl to do? She is hungry. She is listless. She is bored. There's not enough box wine in the world that could solve this lonely old lady's problems. Her, whatever, did she eat her previous boyfriend? I don't know, but her boyfriend's gone. She's single, alone in the city, a little peckish. Do you want some Chinese? I want to stay full, as the saying goes. And, how about some slurp Italian? What the hell? Like, it starts out on a comedic angle or eye rolling moment. Okay. You got this beautiful, 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 what's a girl to do looking girl, naked, strolling around her weirdly paint peeling and wallpaper peeling abandoned looking apartment that is downtown in a city, bright lights, big city, lonely girl. What's a girl to do? I want some food to eat. I mean,
it's like the beginning of every fucking music video in the late 80s and early 90s.
Yeah.
Just some girl looking in her reflection. Listless is a great way, while she's in some kind of impossible studio apartment that probably has one of those elevator lifts into it, like where you have to pull the metal cage back, and you saw those on TV all the time, and it's like, what is this? And she probably has like really weird, like too many potted plants everywhere, and you're just thinking to yourself, what's with all the potted plants? This is Anne Paralod or Paralude. That's La Femme Nikita. John Landis apparently cast her because he really liked her in La Femme Nikita. So that's what I knew her from. But holy fuck, the opening sequence, I was like, I was 10. There is full frontal nudity immediately. She is just not dressed. And listen, and I'm sorry, my mom listens to this fucking show. So, but like, there's a couple of like dormant things in my mind when I was watching this film where I'm like, I feel like a lot of like my early sexual awakening happened during this movie, because this is a lot of fucking nudity and a lot of things that
Mm-hmm.
stayed burned in my mind, including one memorable scene during the inevitable lovemaking that happens later that was like burned in my mind, or I'm like, maybe this explains who I am as a man. But the weird thing is that all the nudity in the world could not distract me from the LA noir gumshoe hard boiled narration that is going on. This device in this film is used 2 times and never again. And that to me is weirder than if it were narration through the whole thing.
I think because they have this omniscient point of view sort of thing where they can, change whose head we're in and who we're following. If they only followed her and she was on screen for every single scene, pardon me, then maybe interjecting it in the center or later on or a few times would make some sense. But she just sort of like bookends the film that way. And then we leave her point of view, where we come into the film in her point of view, and we leave the film in her point of view. But during that time, we jump to other scenes and people. Um, I kind of I like it. I don't mind it. I think that if we jump back into her point of view after spending time with other people as the main character on screen, whose head we're in, so to speak, it would be weird. That would be way weirder. So I'm fine with her bookending it with her little Wonder Years vignette. Or yeah, it is like a hard boiled crime. You want the detective to be talking about the dame with the legs that go on to Sunday or whatever. Yeah. But that's the cinematic look we have. That's what the music is telling us that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
Yet we're greeted with this gorgeous, short-haired,
Mm-hmm.
modern and sexy, strong woman who can, scale up buildings wearing a cute little summer dress in the middle of what, February in Pittsburgh. It's a very neat film that way. And I do love using a different city. It's not a typical skyline. As soon as we get the shots of the skyline in this, I had said to Chris, "What city is this?" And he's like, "I'm not really sure." It looks like it's supposed to be New York, so it makes sense that it was supposed to be shot in New York. But they do not hide the fact, and they celebrate the fact that it is filmed in Pittsburgh. And
Mm-hmm.
I've visited the areas that are shot in some of the pans and some of the fly-in crane shots of just the city of bridges. It's called the city of bridges or Steel City for a reason. There probably are 1,000 loft apartments like you're describing in this town. It's a gorgeous little town, and they show a lot of like landmarks and like places that just closed down after being open for 90 years as a corner sandwich stop in Little Italy. And it seems to me that every corner in the Pittsburgh that we are presented with here is Little Italy. It's amazing that way. It's I want to visit a lot of cities in film, but this one makes Pittsburgh look pretty fantastic.
When we are introduced to Marie, we are introduced to a woman who is on the prowl, and she is looking for food lids, and she is looking at newspapers, and she is seeing that there is a crime wave. Now, we know that we're watching a vampire film, and we can tell that she is probably an older vampire, and we are going to learn her methodology, but not before we're introduced to the most nefarious band of no good nicks you ever did see, with Sal and his cronies. going through the big book. First of all, they got like every mobster actor they could possibly find. It's crazy. Some of these people end up being on The Sopranos years later. Some people, I feel like they're literally a gangster in every movie I've ever seen them in. And you get to see these scenes in which Sal kills a guy, but not before asking him a lot of really weird questions about a toaster oven. And that's where we're introduced to our second protagonist, where it's basically like you'd think initially he is going to be in the mob, but he's not all the way in yet, and he's not as brutal as everybody, and or he hasn't been broken by fear, because Sal is like a particularly violent mob boss. But no, it turns out he's a undercover cop.
And badly undercover at that, because it's not long before we see him posing with like his boss in the newspaper, and the mob knows all about his undercover antics. He is the crappiest undercover cop ever. I guess they're done with this undercover sting that never actually happened.
This scene is fucking wild. And I rewound it because I was thinking to myself, what the fuck did I miss? Why did he...
No, you didn't miss anything.
Why did his, I guess, chief, his commanding officer, admonish him for showing up to a crime scene and acting like a cop while he's supposed to be deep undercover, and then literally throw her arm around his shoulder and smile big as all these like old-timey press come pouring out of a van like a clown car? They may as well have like the press cards like, what a scoop, and they all have big bulb looking cameras. And then the next thing you see is that he's posed on the cover of the newspaper because there was what we assume, a violent mob hit. Because the reason why he has gone there is because his friend Tony, who was kind of like, he's in the mob and, you know, is definitely a criminal, but kind of on his side and, you know, telling Sal to calm down, and, you know, like, because Joe is like sad that Tony gets killed. Now we know, because we saw that it was Marie that killed Tony by, now originally she was planning on eating Joe, but he was a good guy. She could see the sadness in his eyes. Another part of that narration, used sparingly. And she then tries to go for Tony, who is more overtly violent, let's say. He is an actual member of the mob, not an undercover cop. And she goes through her reasoning for the light seduction. She kills him. She sees her reflection, doesn't like that, and then takes out her little shopping bag, which she uses to clean herself off. Again, this movie is fucking violent, gang. Like, holy shit, is it fucking violent. And then she takes out a shotgun and she kills it. And it's the same reasoning as the vampires from 30 Days of Night. They don't want to increase their ranks and potentially have this overflow of vampires running every which way, killing indiscriminately, risking exposure. So there's that sense, again, that I really associate with Anne Rice, like that sense of we have to keep our existence secret, essentially. We're like the Illuminati that eats people. And we find out that blowing their heads off stops the vampirism. As you do, I guess.
Which makes a lot of sense, especially if this is her hunting ground, so to speak, and we think of them as like lone wolves or lone jaguars, as the case may be. Then, yeah, she doesn't want to certainly not make more vampires to like have to share her hunting ground with. She seems to be a pretty solitary creature and prefer mortal mates, it seems.
Mm.
But she has also like chosen to feed primarily, if not exclusively, on bad guys. The whole like, you know, I'm a force for good because I'm cleaning up the streets of these evil people, so I'll only kill bad guys, like Dexter. This is the second time I made a Dexter parallel with this woman. So yeah, that's what she's doing. So why would she want them to be her company? I mean, if I were going to be making more vampires, I would want like someone who like is quiet on long trips, enjoys a good jigsaw puzzle, and maybe discussing books over coffee. That's a choice for a vampire pal, I guess, because you wouldn't be able to avoid one another. Not that there is not a robust city nightlife here, but at 4 in the morning, the only people prowling the streets, wiping blood off their face, is going to be you and whoever you made as a vampire. So you don't want to share the streets with these guys. So it makes sense for her to do what she's done. But everything kind of goes off kilter because not only does she have maybe the mob, like she didn't think it through very well. Aside from Italian sounds good, she didn't think about this is a crime family that will hunt you down. Really, if this was a serious film that went really seriously, they would figure out who the hell she was and what happened here because it's not a mob hit, quite obviously, to them. But she has a cop on her hands because Joe, after being pulled off the undercover case and having his face splashed immediately all over every paper that would print it, which is stupid, he's put into protective custody, which, okay, they should have done that before putting his face all over everything. He spends all of 10 minutes in his safe house.
And he's like hanging out with them. There's something so weird where he is constantly interacting with the members of the mob, and who are the press are constantly following them. They're aware that the press is constantly following them. They're aware that they're under surveillance because Joe, while he's still undercover, exposes these cops listening in on the van. Why would he do that? What's the strategic advantage? Is it to make everyone super duper believe that you're also in the criminal organization because you... No, now they just think that the cops are surveilling them. It's really fucking weird. But I suppose they could attribute, and they do, assume that this hit on Tony was from one of the rival crime families that are operating in Pittsburgh. I don't know, I called it Philadelphia earlier, but it is Pittsburgh. And so I guess that kind of makes sense, but you kind of described a better movie, or at least a movie that I would be interested in seeing. I would love this if it was a vampire who decided to feed on a mobster because he's a bad guy and she doesn't feel any remorse, but they do through information and their own investigations, and maybe even like tapping some people they have on the take in a police agency, or maybe even they got the mayor on the take, like they can get, and all of a sudden this vampire starts like getting the walls closing in on around her because of the mob. That'd be kind of fucking cool, actually. And you could do a really damn serious movie. I'm stealing this idea. Anyway, but but that's not really the case because he's gonna be arguing in the face with Don Rickles, and I don't know, like punch you in the mouth. Like, what the fuck? You're right. What happened to protective custody?
No, immediately he wants to go out there. He wants to question the morgue. He wants to get on the streets and find whoever killed this guy. For what real reason?
Meanwhile, our beautiful and lovely vampire with an intoxicating accent. She is going to put her sights on the big fish, the shark, if you will, old Sal himself. And she's going to kind of do the same old routine. She's always just a young woman wandering the streets of Pittsburgh in the snow, and she needs a ride. This is a very snowy movie, by the way, so it's cool if you're kind of still in a wintry vibe. And she is going to very easily get a ride with Sal. Lenny is going to take them. Lenny is kind of like Sal's right hand guy. It's like his closest goon, if you will. Drives him around and shit. And he's gonna take Murray back to his place, and things immediately fall off because she doesn't think for a second that he might be eating garlic. He wants garlic mussels, and she's repelled by the smell of it. So we also know that garlic is very effective irritant, at the very least, for her and other vampires. And she eventually is going to get the drop on him when he corners her in this very opulent and tacky bathroom. And no, I'm sorry, it is. But
oh, it is. It is super opulent and super tacky.
So it honestly just looks like what a poor person thinks rich people's things should look like. That's it came across to me. Now he is going to shoot her in the gut while she feeds on his throat, shoot into the ceiling while he feeds on her throat. I think he does shoot her in the gut as well. But at any rate, it alerts Lenny, and then he breaks in and basically shoos her away, and it doesn't allow her to finish the job. And so everyone kind of is under the same assumption. She was some kind of assassin. She killed Sal very gruesomely, and she escaped running across rooftops and shit. Sometimes she can move faster than the human eye can perceive, and other times she's just huffing it. So I don't know. It's very inconsistent with the amount of alacrity that these vampires have. But Sal is going to resurrect. And maybe this is where the comedy is, because you have a surly, angry guy who thought he got murdered. Everyone thought he got murdered. And now they're trying to keep him quiet. Well, he just walks around in a blood-drenched suit, ranting and raving and screaming.
I think that is where it begins. It's kind of like Dracula Dead and Loving It level of ridiculousness, with weird one-liners and not quite breaking the fourth wall, but almost, with, wink wink nudge nudge, I'm a vampire kind of comedy. A little bit of like Keystone Cops, people chasing one another around in front of the press. It's a weird sort of 80s and 90s sense of humor that I never really find very, very funny, but it's a dry humor anyway, so maybe we're not supposed to. To bring it back to Lenny, too, he's got a couple lines that make him sound like the whiniest little bitch. He's like a little bottom boy to Sal the shark, and it's funny. Like it's funny, it's unintentionally funny, especially considering knowing him from The Sopranos. This is David Proval, who played Richie Apria from The Sopranos, and he is super violent, ultra heartless snake who happens to like butt sex, and it's funny. So it makes it even funnier to see him in a very early role where he plays this like whiny bitch bottom and kind of henchman. He just very, very kind of funny. But the scene where he resurrects is also kind of comedic, because we here at Dead Air Podcast really do appreciate a mortuary scene. usually when the mortician himself is not a sandwich eating goober of a man, but breaks out of that probably well earned fucking paradigm of the sandwich eating, not caring mortician, right? We like to see varied morticians.
It's true. He didn't even have
Yeah.
he didn't even have an old Sony Walkman that he's listening to.
He didn't put the clipboard on the dead person's stomach like they're a fucking table.
He's just guys, he's just so accustomed to death. He's around it all the time.
This is actually the most one of the most believable morticians. I like a good believable mortician. We're pretty hard on our morticians here on the show, but this guy's pretty good. But then they get all weirdly Scooby Doo when the dead guy gets up and bolts, and they have to chase him around this university hospital or whatever it is in front of the press who is there to document and get sound bites from the people who have brought in the body of Sal the shark.
The one thing that I wanted to talk about when it comes to this perception of it being a comedy. Listen, if John Landis and everyone bills this as a comedy, all right. But I think where I'm having a problem with that notion is the same problem with John Landis's other horror comedy, black comedy, whatever words you want to throw in there to make comedy work for you, which is American Werewolf in London, a movie that I also don't think is very funny. And I think with Innocent Blood, from the opening shot to seeing a picturesque, beautiful woman with hard boiled narration, all the way to the music, the entire bizarre theme music that plays again and again during the film, and how all of the characters act, a lot of the dialogue, the glowing googly eyes, the jaguar sounds. There's this heightened reality that permeates through the entire film to the point in which it seems almost like pop art, a little art deco-y with the way that everything operates. And so to me, it lacks any comedic context because the entire film operates just one or two notches above accepted reality in how people behave and the words that people say and all of that kind of stuff. And you can see because Landis loves to splice in his love of cinema and tropes and formula, harkening back to older things. All of the cameos: Tom Savini, Sam Raimi, Frank Oz, all like, and so you're constantly being pushed and pulled out of it. So to me, like it doesn't really work as a comedy because anytime that something quote unquote funny happens, like a more like the press, so how do you say he died? And all of a sudden he walks past everybody, and then the a security guard and the mortician run after him. It all seems in keeping. Nothing seems to pop out of you because isn't comedy in more or less about the unexpected? All of this seems completely in context. Am I off here?
No, not at all. And I think that there's a rich cinematic history of trying to blend horror and comedy. Even back in novels, you get Stephen King tries to be funny a lot of the fucking time in his novels. It's not usually used in his films. There's none of the real comedy that is found in the short story Trucks or the novella Trucks that you find in Maximum Overdrive. So even when he's making his own screenplays, he's kind of editing out him trying to be a funny fucking guy. In a lot of his books, it happens. In George R. R. Martin, to pick on a very little known George R. R. Martin story, he wrote a horror novel called Armageddon Rag, way back before he started his fantasy career. And I hated I hated the comedy interjected. I'm like, oh, he's trying to be like Stephen King with that, with putting in all these little jokes and funny things. And Richard Lehman does it in his stuff. And then you come to things like Basket Case, Reanimator, From Beyond. Okay, so like, and Landis does it himself too. So you've got that like early Stuart Gordon stuff being funny, but also being ultra violent and super gory, like so gory it makes your head spin kind of stuff. Dead Alive is like that too. It's super funny, but it's ultra horror-y, and it's takes a really special kind of Raimi to make it work, right? And we get some cameos here. You'd mentioned Tom Savini. He's in this fucking film for a hot minute, and you got a Raimi. You got Sam Raimi, our favorite Raimi of all the Raimis, or second favorite because you know who I like.
Is it Ted Raimi? Yeah,
Yeah,
me too.
yeah, I love Ted Raimi.
Me too.
He's my hero, really, honestly. And the other Raimis, right? There's what, four of them?
I think
Four,
so. Yeah.
five. Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic to see little tiny nods to these people. But yes, I digress. They really were trying for whatever 1992 reason to make it work. And I just tend to ignore it because I tended to ignore it when I was reading Stephen King novels as a kid. I tend to ignore it when I'm watching From Beyond. I'm not there for the comedy. I'm there for the horror.
I guess I'm always just confused. I wanted to even just mention, just when we're talking about blending horror and comedy, James Whale back in the 1930s doing it with The Old Dark House, leaning more into comedy with The Bride of Frankenstein. And so, in the early days of horror cinema, they were doing it. And these films were really successful. But I think that for me, it, even though I love a good horror comedy, I guess I just find myself too oftentimes watching a film that's not funny enough to be a comedy and not scary enough to work as a horror film for me. And so it ends up in this completely watchable, but hard for me to just say this is a comedy. And I've always had this disconnect of really being able to discern if this is supposed to be comedic or not. I'm bad at, I don't know. Well, I really don't know. And Innocent Blood is such an example where frankly, I think people are fucking nuts for thinking that this is a comedy, because it'd almost be like saying any film with violence is a horror film. Any film with a laugh or two in it, either through a physical or a one-liner, that doesn't make it a comedy, does it? Because there's one joke in it.
There's a movie coming up on the bill. In fact, our next movie that I think is fucking hilarious in a lot of times, but it's not. It is absolutely not, and it cannot be billed as a comedy. No way, no how. This particular film ought to have been a crime horror film, but nowhere do you see those two words used in its billing. It is a crime horror film, no matter how you slice it. It's not a comedy action film at all. And it's weird to me. We've stumbled upon a few films like this that are not billed as horror that definitely are, but then there's also films that are billed as horror that are definitely not.
Yeah, and I don't mean for us to get so into the weeds of this film, but amongst many of the things that I think about with this film in terms of its imagery and its storytelling, I also constantly think about this, about how it's referred to as a comedy, and I just don't think it's a comedy. But it's subjective. So if somebody was like, "You're out of your mind, Nipe, it is a comedy," fucking fine, I guess. But I digress. Where we are now is we got to have our official meet cute lids, because we need to have our buddy cop type scenario. We got ourselves a gumshoe and a French vampire. It's the team up you didn't know you wanted, but you got it.
Pretty much. And I think it's hilarious to me that somebody who's supposed to be in protective custody, who could have been, the undercover cop that cracked this case wide open with the mob, is there at the like second killing the next night. He's supposed to be in protective custody, goddamn it. He should be in a different city. But no, he's there being like, so was there makeup under his fingernails? A dame did this, this was the perpetrator was a female. And everyone's like, da, da, da. So he goes off and follows a trail of blood, basically through Gothic church after Gothic church into the shower stalls of a Gothic church. Like, what part of fucking Pittsburgh is this? It's weird that they go this cat and mouse between gumshoe and vampire through the snowy city. It goes on way too long too.
It does. And I do like the imagery here. I like the churches, and I think that it's
Oh, I love it.
it's interesting how, again, so often Marie seems repulsed by her reflection. Like, it makes her angry to look at. And could we have had, she's done this 2 times already in this film, seen her reflection and smashed it. What are we saying? What are we saying with this? Is it, I'm haunted, I only see the monster? Is it, I'm sick of seeing this frozen face? Is it something like Portrait of Dorian Gray? Like, if I look at my reflection too long, I don't know what. What are we saying here?
Like, does she see a totally different thing in the mirror? Does she see the monster that we see when her eyes have turned to opalescent green, blue, red, orange, whatever color they've decided that their eyes are going to be at the moment, because they change? And like, is that what they're seeing?
The changing eye color is so interesting to me. It kind of makes me think of like a teenager writing a Wattpad story. Like, when my eyes are red, it means I'm angry. And when my eyes are green, it means I'm on the hunt. And when my eyes are blue, it means I'm sad. It's like,
That's exactly it. It's mood ring eyes. I like the look of them though. I mean, like the effect is good enough. It's aged okay.
yeah,
It's something different
yeah.
too. I like something different when it comes to vampires. I like the amount of teeth that are paired with these opalescent eyes. Like, they're good monsters. They don't feel very vampire-y.
They don't, but I think it's enough of a shorthand with all the vampire stuff that they did put into the film. I get it. I just think that they were kind of being a little loosey goosey with it. You know, one of the advantages of you doing, we see less and less big movies come out these days that are not just adaptations of something else. So this really is its own thing. And so they're able to take a lot of liberties with however they want the vampires to opulate or whatever, or to operate, and how they think it's cool and whatnot. But when these two characters get together, Marie has one very simple request, and that is to drive your now partially destroyed car that I partially destroyed to the morgue, because she has to go kill her. This is, I don't know if this is where she refers to Sal as her child. She does refer to him as her child at least once in the film, and I thought that was very interesting. So I was like, oh, you're getting into like siring and shit like that, which is a very interesting idea. Again, they don't, there's so much stuff that they could be talking about and dealing with, and I just feel like they keep veering off into the least interesting things that they could possibly be talking about, when the things that I'm really interested in about the torment of being a vampire, tell me why she hates her reflection. Please, I'm begging you, tell me why she hates her reflection. Tell me, does she think of Sal as an errant child? Is that what this is? You have to help me kill my child? Or did she just, like, tell me about how she perceives the world aside from just like, I wanted Italian tonight, like, or I want to fuck badly. I just
Hmm.
I just find this aspect so frustrating. And now, as a kid, I'm just like, woo, titties. But like now as an adult, I'm like, can we, like, there's interesting ideas almost happening here with the things that she says and the things that she does and how she does them. And you don't fucking explore any of them. You just put little morsels out. Like, were you expecting a sequel? What the fuck is going on here? And so,
A sequel would be helpful, actually, because most of the lore, like you've pointed out, is done in scenes where we don't have any dialogue, where she's smashing mirrors. She's alone usually when we're getting any vampire lore. At the beginning, we get a little voiceover, right? But we get her smashing through a stained glass window into a church shower, I
it's
guess.
so
It's
weird.
like,
Why are there
yeah.
showers here?
And there's crosses everywhere in the shower, and she obviously has no aversion to them. So she doesn't have aversion to most of the things that vampires do, but we don't get anything. We get a very cinematic scene of a naked vampire woman washing blood off of her in a church bathroom with a smashed stained glass window. That's a gorgeous looking scene. The scene where she is doing like a one-armed hang for like 2 straight minutes behind him. Like, holy power. The
Yeah.
upper body strength is impeccable.
But again, it goes back to my thing as like supernaturally powerful women, so sexy. I think that's why I like all those. I think that's why I like all those underworld movies, despite themselves.
Ah,
Or I'm just like,
yep. Hmm.
oh man, that's so good.
But yeah, it doesn't inform us about any of the lore that built her. Does she, eschew all the old guard vampire ways? Does she say my child with a bit of a thorn in her side because it's old vampire thinking to talk like that or something? Or does she embrace that sort of return to old guard vampires? Like, we don't know. We have no idea. She's basically a box wine French woman out on the town. That's a lot of her attitude. She has attitude too, which is kind of nice. She, yeah, is a shitty driver because she can't see very well with the bright lights in her face. She does have an aversion to light. They all do. But she makes Joe drive.
She does. I like that idea that you just postulated. It's very intriguing to me. We'll get on with the plot for a second. The plot is very bare bones, which is why I want to talk about other things. But you talking about her as being a little bit of like a punk, like a little bit of an outsider. Maybe that's what the pixie cut really symbolizes. She's like a modern woman of the 90s who doesn't care about all the old guard vampire stuff. And maybe, in the world of vampires, maybe she's less than 100 years old, or maybe like 100-ish years old. And so she's practically a kid as far as vampires go. And so she wants to do things on her own. And maybe that's why she has her own personal code, because she fights against being a monster. She has that dark passenger, and she wants to find a way to make it useful. And she needs to feed because she wants to keep her eternal life going. It may as well be terrible people, and then she's even going to clean up her mess so as not to make more vampires. But she spares Joe initially because she views him as an innocent, as a good man, and someone that she shouldn't kill. Now, they are going to be in pursuit of Sal after he escapes. Now, he goes to Don Rickles' house. Manny. I keep calling him Don Rickles because he's played by the very famous comedian Don Rickles, who, by the way, it's crazy how long people live. He didn't die that long ago. He was already in his 60s when he was making this movie,
Oh,
and so
wow.
he
Yeah.
lived to 90. And I was watching this. I was like, Jesus Christ, he just looked old my entire life. Like people just live a long time sometimes, and this is watching Sal's descent. Like, speaking of punks, he's kind of like a punk teenager. Like, you have all these mob goons sort of standing around looking at each other whispering to each other. Well, this guy is gray skinned and he had a thermometer in his stomach and he's very weak. He's very agitated and he keeps smelling people and people smell good and he's trying to eat raw meat. There's a lot of shit going on here. And it's leading up to his first feeding, which is something that Marie definitely did not want to happen.
And I like this weird tacky opulence of his lawyer's house, because that's who Manny is this lawyer with a fucking overstuffed and overwrought weird wife that doesn't seem to know what's going on. Typical mob wife, I suppose, if you follow the trope and film and stuff like that. But he's like making a mess of the place. He's like smashing glasses and totally out of his ordinary. And it is a gory film as far as the blood. I mean, it's weird how when someone's made a vampire in this movie and they die, they come back as almost like a zombie looking person.
Yes.
But after they fed, doesn't he look a lot better?
He does. And he's got his powers have come to fruition. You know, Manny's wife, I'm assuming, is like half in the bag with barbiturates, by the way. So
yeah, and she's sitting in the can drinking too. So she's like mixing her booze and pills. I totally agree with you. Yeah. And even though she is out after he gets killed and his blood drank, that's at first feeding, and she's like waving down police officers and stuff. So she is obviously overwrought because, I mean, a gory, horrible death just happened in her home. Her husband's dead. She's losing her mind. He killed my Manny. But she's obviously not aware of the larger situation while she's running out into the street in her nightgown. All she needs is a little tiny dog under her arm.
Joe is going to spy on this property because he's everywhere you don't want to be. For a guy who's supposed to be in witness protection, he is right up the mob's asshole looking for Sal, and he manages to get himself kidnapped while Manny gets killed. And now Sal and but the problem is, Lids, is day is breaking. And there's one law that they must adhere to: sunlight. And not only is it going to be a situation in which they just can't come out into the light, it seems like they almost have a hypnotic compunction to sleep. Sal is going to end up in a meat locker, and he's going to use a piece of beef as a pillow. And it's like he wants the lights out, and he just does one yawn, and he basically just curls up like a baby and goes to sleep. And so too must the rescued Joe and Marie have to go find a motel for the night.
Well, of course. I mean, we've only got two vampires in the story. One's going to sleep in a meat refrigerator, a walk-in freezer with a Raimi looking on, and the other one is going to go and get sexy.
Man. So let me talk a little bit about this sex scene. And we normally don't go into this type of shit on the show because, who the hell wants to hear about this? Like I said, my mother listens to this fucking show. This scene is so fucking weird. And one of the things that I couldn't get over is my major criticism of all of this wasted time is you have a situation in which this woman is begging for sex, and trying to come up with all of these different scenarios in which, what if we do this? Will you fuck me then? Or what if we do this? Will you fuck me then? And I remember watching this scene as an adult when I first rewatched this movie. So not the third time, but the second time. And I was like, I can't believe this scene is happening. Like, I can't believe I can't believe I'm watching this guy get a blowjob and can't get it up because he's scared that this woman is going to get too excited and kill him for food. And so, and I was just like, why don't you like your reflection? Talk about that. I don't care about this. Like, listen, you're a stunning example of womanhood. It's great to see you naked, but like, I want to know about the reflection. I want to know about anything else. And then she gets him to handcuff her. I will say that I like her breaking the handcuffs. That is very sexy.
Oh yeah, it's cool. It's super cool. That's an interesting thing, and it's also like forcing him to trust her in many ways. And I would feel a little slighted were I in his position. Be like, "Whoa, hey, we put those handcuffs on you for a reason, you monster." But it is a cinematic. It's sexy and it's cool. And it's cool the next day where she kind of looks at the one cuff left on her wrist and is kind of like, "Aw, that's cute.
Yeah.
Looks kind of nice." And then just snaps it off anyway because she has superhuman strength, which is like other scenes that we've had proof of this, aside from her like snapping people's necks and stuff and pulling herself up Eve's troughs with just her hands, upper body strength. Like, whoa. This is a really nice scene. It goes on too long and they could have just faded to black. Whatever.
Holy shit, does it go on for a long time. Good for everyone involved, I guess. This is also where she's getting fucked and her eyes just keep differentiating colors. And I'm like, what does this mean? What does this mean? Like anything, please, anything. But one of the images that I've had in my head since childhood was her breaking those cuffs. Like, I don't know what it says about me as a person, but like, even as a kid, I was like, oh, I like that. That's a powerful woman who can break handcuffs. That's good. That's intriguing. Is there more of this anywhere? But moving on, I wanted to get that off my chest because I just can't believe it's such a weird fucking scene. And
well, yeah, we got to get to the strip club. I mean, enough of the sex. Let's get some fucking sex. Oh, Jesus Christ. I hate strip club scenes in movies. I will say every single time there is one, even in shows. Like, I love The Sopranos. I like watching The Sopranos. I hate strip club scenes. I specifically hate strip club scenes in The Sopranos while I'm watching it with my father. But it's so, and I think it's just entirely a woman's problem in that you've seen enough of this all your life, women parading around naked for men's pleasure or for other women's pleasure. I don't care about pleasure. I'm not here for that. I do not fucking care. So it always feels like an affront or like a record scratch when I'm watching a film and a strip club scene comes up. I've been in strip clubs numerous times, never for the strip club though. For wings or to go and talk to the owner or talk to the DJ or talk to someone that worked there, not to go to the strip club. So I didn't go to this movie to go to the strip club either,
I've never been to a strip club, and I think that we've talked about this before. I'm too uptight. I would be too scared that someone would try to get me a lap dance as a prank, and I would just be like, gee whiz. I really don't know. I'm sorry, ma'am. I'll give you the money. I'll just walk away. But I really, and because there's no context to it, it's not like another vampire movie, which I enjoy quite a bit. Vamp. The whole thing takes place.
That's different to me for whatever reason.
But because
that's more like burlesque.
And it's context, right? Sexiness, nudity with context is different than this being an inserted strip club scene is almost like an inserted shower scene. At least in this, Marie's like, okay, she wants sex more than blood. She's a sexual woman. At least in the shower scene, she wants to clean blood off of her. It's practical. There's context to things, right? But with this, I even had the thought when I was watching it, like, ugh, well, I guess they had to get their nudity in here somewhere. And then I was like, wait a second. Marie's been naked like 3 times. Why
Yeah.
do you
Yeah.
need to have this ridiculous scene? Or like, why do you need, okay, fine. It's an old cliche. Mob bosses are, it's like the Jack Ruby of it all. Oh,
Yeah.
you own a strip bar. Well, then can't everyone, why do you have to show that many naked women? And I think to me, it always reads as particularly adolescent,
Hmm.
where it's just like we want to see boobies. Like we want to have like characters talking to each other where there's just tits around. And again, I love women. I love nudity, but I don't need to see it. And I agree with you. Like it just sticks out like a sore thumb, and just accomplishes nothing. But I will tell you what else is going to accomplish. I'll tell you what else is going to accomplish nothing. Making your mafia family vampires. That's
It sounds like a great idea on paper.
so Sal's got a plan. And if you were to ask me what this fucking movie is even about, anyways, it would be a mob boss becomes a vampire because of negligence and then becomes the worst possible version of that by creating a mob family coven of vampires. Doesn't that sound fucking terrifying? Imagine the resources, money, influence of the mafia, and now combine them with superhuman strength and super hearing and super smell and all of the powers and extra bloodthirstiness of vampirism. And now, what could we do with that? Would they try to would they get into like, fuck racketeering? We're now into human trafficking because we need to get blood banks going. We need to there's all these scary scenarios that you could come up with to do something with that. We're not going to get any of that because that's not the fucking plot of this movie whatsoever. This only happens in like the last 30 minutes of the goddamn film. And if you were to ask Chibi West how much of turning his friends into vampires this movie entailed, I would have thought 90% of the movie was that, because that's how I remembered it. But that's just not the case. Now, Manny, Don Rickles' character, is going to fucking die like a dog, like the guy in Let the Right One In. It's just like curtains opening in a hospital and he's going to erupt. It's disgusting. Shout out to a cameo of Linnea Quigley as a nurse.
It's adorable. It's adorable. Chris is much better than I am at recognizing any of these people, especially things like the effects coordinator has a cameo in this scene as well. And I forget his name. He's famous and had worked on a lot of films and like other things. It's only a matter of luck that I recognize some of my favorites as far as the Savinis and Raimis of the world. But people, of course, from Sopranos. Like we've got quite a lot of Sopranos. We have 2 Sopranos alumni carrying what could be someone from The Godfather, like just it's so rich like that, and you need a really a good attention to detail, which Chris has more so than I do with these sorts of scenes. But yeah, I like films where vampires burst into flame, especially vampires that don't know really what they are or accidental, or, even if they plan it, we got 30 Days of Night sort of ideas there where this movie ends up going in a way. But I love this scene. I love the pandemonium of it, the unexpected nature of it. I like, in a way, that it is one less accidental vampire to worry about. Because I don't know if a lawyer vampire would have been very helpful. We could make some jokes there about how they're bloodsuckers to begin with, but I've never met a lawyer that I didn't like.
Me either. I always find that they're very charismatic. But that being said, I don't know any defense lawyers, so I don't know. I know a lot of like corporate lawyers and stuff like that. So who knows?
Mhm,
But
mhm.
but the the death, the immolation, however you want to call it, scene of Manny is great and a standout sequence, and it really shows the brutality in which death by sunlight is for these vampires. It seems as terribly painful and languid as you could possibly imagine. And it kind of reminded me a lot of the immolation scenes that we were seeing in Last Voyage of the Demeter. Just very awful, painful, brutal ways to go for a vampire, which makes sense that not only would they have aversion to sunlight because it kills them, but it's also a terrible way to go, even as a vampire. So Sal is going to first change his old buddy Lenny. One of the other images, aside from Marie breaking handcuffs from behind her back while naked, and the other image that really stuck out into my mind was Lenny breaking his own cast against the door frame because he got shot in the foot, and so he had a cast, and obviously as a vampire those old wounds heal immediately, and so he doesn't need the cast anymore. And then it goes to luring more of his mob friends upstairs in this strip club, in which they just keep feeding on each other and growing their ranks. And you think to yourself, oh man, this is scary. How's Marie and Joe going to get out of this one? I mean, they're just going to shoot them.
You wish in a way that you're going to see some really spectacular vampire deaths here, but we don't get anything that equates to Manny's death necessarily.
This is possibly one of the biggest letdowns. I can excuse kind of weird scenes, sex scenes that go on too long, nudity where I don't need to see nudity, odd character choices. I can excuse all of that stuff. But if you give me a cool setup and you absolutely shit the bed in a 2-hour long fucking movie, and you don't give me a worthwhile ending in which it fucking matters that these guys are vampires or not, it does not matter that they're vampires. Each one of them gets shot. That's it. And talk about vampires as zombies. It's just shoot them in the head. You shoot them in the torso, you shoot them anywhere, you can blow them up, you can do whatever. But if all you gotta do is shoot them in the brain, you shoot them in the brain, they're gonna instantly fucking die. And I'm sorry, that's not good enough. That sucks. It fucking blows. and like, I just wish, like, if you want to dispatch them quickly, demonstrate that Marie is a vampire herself, and she's like, give it like the Abigail logic, like takes a long time to do the really cool shit. Just like make her a more powerful vampire because she's old and these guys have literally just turned, and stake them, fine, break their necks like you're fucking Steven Seagal, like however you want to do it. But man, this blows. And I just thought it was such a wasted pretend. I don't mean to rag on it. It's not the end of the world, but it just bums me out.
No, it is a bummer, especially if you recall the film as mostly that, but it really only takes, it doesn't happen to the last half of the film. It's probably a 15-minute scene. Not even. It might even be a 10-minute scene because they spend a lot of time in the strip club establishing that it is indeed a strip club.
I just, what's the point of taking your time one by one, showing that you're turning all of these mob guys, and you're not even going to show them as like this powerful, united, terrifying front. You're just like,
no, it's a case of tell, don't show, because he has that moment, of course, where he's got his two cronies, he's got his arms around them, and he's like, the Michellis are going to rule this city. I mean, that's it. That's what we understand, that he thinks that vampire mob will rule the city. That's it. We're not shown any of it. We're not shown how powerful they are. We suspect that they'll be as powerful as Marie maybe someday, but they're all kind of too dumb to maybe know exactly what they are, except that they can't get hurt. And I mean, that may be enough. Just that in of itself is, that they have the super healing power. And killing isn't just a waste, and now they can consume those dead bodies that they've created. Not that mob affiliated people kill people all the time either, right? That's a comic joke. It's not true, really, that there's that much death that would sustain a vampire army. But we're only told in that one line of me and my vampire mob is going to rule the city. That's basically all that we're told. This scene probably lasts as long as the scene where Sal eventually bites it. No vampire pun intended.
This film came out in 1992. And there's limitations to not just what you can do with special effects, but there's limitations on what justifies an action sequence. So, and I had just used this example. The sea change is 1999 with The Matrix. Look at an action sequence between characters before The Matrix and look at every action sequence after The Matrix. They're completely fucking different. They're shooting it in wide. There's choreography. Look at the difference between Blade 1 and Blade 2. Like it's insanely different what constitutes, even though there's cool action sequences. I ain't gonna knock Blade 1. I love that movie. But
yeah, it's a great movie.
But like, I just want to put that in there because, and the reason why I'm mentioning this is because the fucking Marie finally gets to her child, Sal, who is a vampire that's listen, he's only a few days, maybe a day old. He's still the second oldest vampire that we've encountered in this entire fucking narrative. And he is particularly vicious. He seems like he's probably smart, even though he's got a bit of a, I think that the story wants us to think he's smart. I don't think he's particularly smart. He's a bit of a meathead, if you ask me. But what are we going to do here? They're just going to lamely struggle with each other. She's going to get shot, and he's going to get shot just as much as her. But yet she, with her 2 bullet wounds to the stomach, has to tell Joe, go get him. Oh, stop worrying about me. Go. I'm like, why? So go get him. He just jumped off a fucking roof and you want the normal man to go and get this guy. Why? The only reason why they catch Sal at all is because I can only determine, based on the narrative in front of me, Sal just was tired of being alive anyways. Because he stands in the middle of the road. Mind you, Marie has demonstrated, maybe this is a product of her age, but he has also demonstrated supernatural speed. He stands there like a goon and gets hit by a taxi and a bus. Then he stands there chuckling to himself, covered in gasoline, while Joe has time to go down, hurriedly run down all these flights of stairs, go to the street. He's still standing there. And then he has enough time to look at Joe slowly pull out his lighter. Marie is there now. And then slowly throw the lighter onto the gasoline and watch the flames slowly go towards him while he's like, and then it blows him the fuck up. And then you're like, oh my God, now walk out of it like you're the fucking Terminator. And he does. And then you're like, okay, now do something. Oh, he's going to do something. He's going to complain that you wrecked his suit. He's going to chuckle to himself maniacally. And he's going to say that, like, I'm Sal, I'm powerful. I'm going to fucking do all this stuff. And then he's going to get shot and cartoonishly fall apart in a pile of ash. And we're out of here. What the fuck, dude? What the holy fuck? This ending is dog shit.
It is, but it is saved in that we do have an actual vampire on the scene who is like, that's it. I've lived long enough as it is. I'm gonna go and watch the sunrise.
I was like, I'm sorry, when were we supposed to believe she was suicidal? Like
Her job here is done. She's killed Sal the shark.
She's easily convinced not to do it, by the way.
Well, of course. I mean, she could dine out whenever she likes. She has an understanding mate now. And I suspect that she's going to turn him into a vampire too, unless she prefers a mortal mate. I don't really. She seems to. I don't know what happened with her previous boyfriend, as I was saying at the beginning. But yeah, the end is weirdly rushed. The fact that none of these vampires die, except one in vampire-y ways, is kind of a pain. It's a shame that most of vampires, too, the newly made vampires, spend more time as like a revenant zombie-looking vampire and not the well-dressed mafioso vampires that we want to see, right?
Sal is clean and put together for like 8 seconds in the movie. Like every other time he's completely covered in blood-soaked clothes. It's actually kind of hysterical. There is a sense in terms of Marie's chosen mates that I think speaks to her immortality and experience. Say you fall in love with somebody and you make that person immortal and you're at the peak of fiery passion. Now, think back in your mind every relationship you ever had that in the normal human lifespan soured, and perhaps you parted amicably or perhaps you didn't part amicably. But the potential of creating your worst enemy is the problem with making someone else immortal to live with you, because we're not puffins. Humans, like not every human can manage to mate for life. You can't, and so, okay, so you love this person now. What about 100 years from now? What about 200 years from now? What about 1,000 years from now? And I think that's the problem, and why she was just like, it's like that old parable. It's like there's 2 footsteps in the sand, and one is where you and I walk together, and when there's one set of footprints, it's where you died and left me alone because I can't love someone forever.
I thought it was when somebody carried somebody else. Jesus, Wes. Make that parable really cruel. Extremely dark. That's where you died. Okay. Yeah, sure. I thought it was where you carried the other person. Jesus.
Carried their dead body to the fire.
Yeah, you want to see what happens when vampires make eternal mates, like point over to Anne Rice. A lot of that's about that. Point over to Only Lovers Left Alive, of course. Even the more new book, The Radleys, or new film made from a book, The Radleys, deals with that to a certain extent. I really highly recommend The Radleys. That's super duper fun if we're talking vampires.
Oh, I love my vampires like I like my parables, tormented and fraught with depressing imagery. But so I went a little hard on this movie at the ending. What I like about it is I do like the character of Marie quite a bit. I think she's played well. I find her very intriguing. And I would love a whole series of Innocent Blood. I mean, if you can't get a movie together, like do a comic book series, take this character, make a novel, do something with her that either perpetuates this forward. I don't necessarily need to see, like, do a prequel where it says where she was. No, don't do that. She can have some flashbacks, but move the story forward. And this character herself is very fascinating to me. And I like her and I want to know more about her, but frustratingly, John Landis has other ideas about what is and is not important. I could have used 100% less strip club and 100% more diving into why she is the way that she is. When she's walking towards that sunset, could you have thrown any bit of dialogue throughout the film amongst all of the, oh, I can't get your dick up because you're scared and here's a strip club? Could you have taken those scenes out and done something different and given us more background on this character? That's what I lament. And I don't think this is a bad movie by any stretch of the imaginations. I just see the grains of something that's fucking incredible and it's wasted. And I think that's where I'm at with it.
It's an interesting addition, as is Forever Night, to vampire lore and vampire filmmaking, and where we went so incredibly right with American Werewolf in London, we kind of go wrong here. And it's not a wonder not a lot of people remember this film. I don't ever hear it really talked about. And if you want to talk about like 90s vampire, sexy, it's Vamp. That's really it. It's like it's weird that I forgot about that film. I love it. I used to have a VHS copy of it. Watched it several times. We've done it for the show. I love that film. But that's really where it begins and ends as far as like alternative sexy vampire films.
And even more openly comedic as well. Like it's I would be very comfortable saying like that is a horror comedy. It is intended to be a horror comedy. And I mean, for God's sakes, you have someone, you have this vampire flipping you off as she dies. Like, that's supposed to be openly comedic as far as I'm concerned. So, you know, it's like Innocent Blood, and you're totally right. Like, it's not really, I can't remember ever hearing anyone talk about it. And I'm sure one of the listeners now is like, I talk about this movie all the time. I don't know you in real life, okay? So I didn't hear you talk about it, but I'm saying generally speaking, I don't see YouTube videos on it. I don't see TikToks on it. I don't see any comments when people say, recommend me some vampire films. It seems to have gotten lost in the shuffle. I think it's worth watching. And I think at the very least, if anyone's curious out there, I think that it's, well, like I said, it's just worth watching. But man, I just there's just aspects about it that bum me out, because there's a lot of good ideas here, a lot of good ideas, and a lot of cool scenes. Just the overall execution left me a little wanting.
So we'll have to keep our eyes out for some mob crime vampire films, because that's what I want to watch now. Nothing but mob crime vampire films, because it's super niche. But I think that this is found readily alongside other crime and mob films. Of course. I mean, of course Chris was very familiar with this because he's a fan of a lot of those mob films. I'm sure that's part of why my father enjoyed it, like I said, because it had that element to it. So that's what makes it win in my books. I had a lot of fun with it. It was good to bring it to the show, I think.
Well, I had fun too. Like I said, sometimes I just get up on my feelings about the potential. But
yeah.
What do we got next for him?
Coming up next, we have a Lydia pick. It is something you have not even seen yet, Wes. It is a 2024 film, which is brand spanking new compared to most of the films that we do on the show. But I was so taken with this, stumbling upon it on Netflix. It is the 2024 Indonesian film Sumala. And from the one sheet, you know, we want to talk vampires, want to talk creatures. Sumala may not be a vampire, but boy, is she a creature. That is not a spoiler. It is on the one sheets. She is insane looking and looks almost vampiric with a grinning, toothy smile and fangs galore. It's amazing. It's a wonderful film. I had so much fun with it. It is incredibly gory. It is incredibly opulent. It is acted so well. I can't believe I've not heard people talk about it. But then again, I don't talk to a lot of people. So I'm going to talk to you, Wes, and I'm going to have you watch Sumala. I'm very, very interested to hear what you have to say about it. And then after that, we'll be hitting Nosferatu to go back into vampires.
I'm very excited to see this film. I don't know anything about it. Classic me. I'm not going to look up anything more. I saw the poster. I get it. So we'll be bringing that to you next time. And on that note, I'm Wes Knight.
And I'm Typical Lydia.
And you've been listening to the Jaguar sounds of dead air. If you like this show, you can find more episodes and other content on splatterpictures.net, Spotify, or wherever you download podcasts. We also upload all episodes to YouTube now, if you'd prefer to listen that way. You can find us across social media like Instagram, X, and TikTok, and the show is edited by Lydia Peaver and hosted by Lydia Peaver and me, Wes Knight. We'll see you next time.
Music by Anorax at anorax.com.